Kim Tae-ho stood at the massive viewing window of his quarters aboard the Galactic Nexus station and watched the stars beyond. The station was huge beyond anything humans had ever built, and it housed representatives from over 60 different alien species. Each morning he woke up to see ships arriving from distant worlds bringing news and trade, and sometimes problems that needed solving. The communication device on his desk made a soft sound, and Park Minji, his aide, walked into the room carrying a datapad. She looked worried, and Tae-ho could see tension in her shoulders as she approached him. "The message is from Earth, sir, and it carries the highest priority seal. The Galactic Council has officially summoned humanity to answer charges brought against our species. We have been accused of barbaric expansion practices and primitive diplomatic methods." Tae-ho took the data pad from her hands and read through the formal document. The language was cold and official, but the meaning was clear. Someone, or several someones on the council, wanted to put humanity in its place. The charges listed were vague but serious enough to require a formal response. What do we know about who brought these charges against us? Minji pulled up another file on her pad and began reading. The primary complaint comes from the Zentorian delegation led by Council Speaker Bexathalan. They claim that human colonies expand too quickly without proper consultation with neighboring species. The Klaxi have joined the complaint, saying that human military vessels patrol areas beyond our assigned territories. Tae-ho walked back to the window and looked out at the various alien ships docked at the station. Each one represented a different world, with different customs and different ways of thinking about the galaxy. Some species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, before humans even discovered fire. To them, humanity was still very young and very primitive. The Vorthak delegation has also signed the complaint. They say that humans refuse to accept guidance from older, more experienced civilizations. There are also complaints about human art and music being too emotional and disruptive to proper diplomatic gatherings. Tae-ho almost smiled at that last part. Human music had become popular on many worlds, despite official disapproval from some governments. He had heard that young Vorthak crystals were secretly listening to human rock music, and their elders were not happy about it. What does Earth Command want us to do about this? Minji hesitated before answering. Ambassador, you are instructed to attend the formal hearing and defend humanity as best you can. However, Earth Command also wants you to know that Captain Lee Dongyun and the Soul's Pride are on standby just outside Council space. If things go badly, they can reach us in 6 hours. The Soul's Pride was a good ship with a good captain, but Tae-ho hoped it would not come to that. Military action near the Galactic Nexus would make everything much worse. The Council controlled trade routes and communication networks that Earth needed. Starting a fight here would hurt humanity more than it would help. How much time do we have to prepare? The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow at the start of the main council session. You will be given time to present humanity's defense, but I do not know how much time. Tae-ho nodded and began thinking about what he would say. The charges were serious, but he knew they were also unfair. Humanity had followed all the proper procedures when establishing new colonies. Human military patrols stayed within legal boundaries. The real problem was that humanity was growing too fast for some of the older species to feel comfortable. Tell me about the council members who will be judging us. Minji brought up profiles on her datapad and began showing him pictures and information. Council Speaker Vexthalan is from Centauri Prime and has held his position for over 50 Earth years. He believes strongly in traditional ways of doing things and thinks newer species should learn slowly and quietly. The Klaxi representative is Commander Tixarak, who comes from a military background and sees human expansion as a potential threat to Klaxi mining operations in the Outer Rim. There were others too. The Nomari delegate, who existed as a cloud of gas inside a special suit. The Rokari ambassador with her 4 arms and silver scales. The Turvan representative who looked almost human, but had eyes that could see colors humans could not even imagine. Each one came from a different world with different needs and different fears. Do any of them support humanity? A few species remain neutral, but none have spoken in our favor. The younger races like the Balani and Krelix seem sympathetic, but they have little influence in the council. Most of the powerful species either support the charges against us or prefer to stay out of the debate entirely. Tai-Ho walked to his desk and sat down to study the files more carefully. The evidence against humanity was thin, but that might not matter. Politics in the Galactic Council often had more to do with relationships and power than facts and justice. If enough influential species wanted to put humanity in its place, they would find a way to do it. The charges say we expand too quickly, but they do not mention that every new human colony has helped the local economy. When we settled New Busan, the planet was struggling with food shortages. Human agricultural techniques increased crop yields by 40% in the first year. That kind of information might help, sir. But I am not sure the Council wants to hear about human successes. The complaint document focuses only on things they see as problems. Tai-Ho continued reading and found more examples of unfair criticism. The document complained about human diplomatic methods being too direct and informal. It said human representatives spoke too frankly and did not show proper respect for established protocols. What it did not mention was that human diplomats had helped solve 3 major trade disputes in the past year by cutting through endless formal procedures and finding practical solutions. The formal hearing will be held in the main council chamber with full media coverage. Representatives from all member species will attend, and the proceedings will be broadcast throughout the galaxy. If we lose this case, the consequences could be severe. Tai-Ho understood what that meant. Economic sanctions would hurt Earth's growing interstellar trade. Restrictions on expansion would limit humanity's ability to find new homes for its growing population. In the worst-case scenario, the Council might authorize military action to force compliance with whatever punishment they decided to impose. What about our allies? Who can we count on for support? Minji looked through more files before answering. The Draki Republic owes us for medical aid we provided during their plague outbreak 5 years ago. The Fenari Collective has profitable trade agreements with Earth. The problem is that both species are relatively small, and their influence in the Council is limited. The morning passed quickly as they studied files and prepared arguments. Tai-Ho knew that tomorrow would be one of the most important days in human history. The way the Council dealt with these charges would set the tone for humanity's future relationships with alien civilizations. By afternoon, the news had spread throughout the station. Tai-Ho could see the change in how other species looked at him when he walked through the corridors. Some seemed sympathetic, but others watched him with suspicion or barely hidden hostility. The Zentorian trade attaché, who usually greeted him politely, now avoided eye contact. Captain Lee sent a coded message confirming that the Soul's Pride was in position and ready to respond if needed. The message also included reports from Earth about public reaction to the news. Humans were angry about the charges, and many wanted their government to respond with strength rather than diplomacy. That evening, Tai-Ho stood again at his window looking out at the stars. Tomorrow he would stand before the most powerful beings in the galaxy and defend his species. The future of humanity's place among the stars would depend on what happened in that council chamber. He thought about all the human colonies spread across dozens of worlds. Farmers working the soil on New Sol, miners extracting rare minerals from the asteroids around New Mokpo, scientists studying alien ecosystems on New Incheon, all of them counting on him to protect their right to live and work among the stars. The charges against humanity were unfair, but that did not mean the Council would reject them. Politics was about power and perception as much as truth. If the older species wanted to put humanity in its place, they had the votes to do it. Minji brought him dinner and they ate in silence while reviewing their notes one more time. Tomorrow would come quickly, and there would be no second chances. Everything humanity had built among the stars was at risk. The main council chamber was enormous and filled with beings from across the galaxy. Tai-Ho walked through the entrance doors and felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching his every step. The chamber was designed to show the power and majesty of galactic civilization, with soaring walls covered in symbols from dozens of worlds, and a central platform where speakers could address the assembled representatives. Park Minji followed behind him, carrying the data files they had prepared. She moved quietly, but Tai-Ho could sense her tension. This was her first time in the main chamber during a formal proceeding, and the atmosphere was intimidating even for experienced diplomats. Council Speaker Vexthalan stood at the central podium, with his 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of authority. The Centaurian was tall and imposing, with blue-gray skin and eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. When he spoke, his voice carried easily through the chamber's advanced acoustic systems. The Galactic Council calls this session to order. We gather today to address serious concerns about the newest member of our community. The species known as humanity has been accused of conduct unbecoming. A civilized people. Taiho had requested a private meeting to discuss the charges but had been denied. Instead, he was told he could present his case during the public session. The message was clear. The council wanted to make an example of humanity in front of the entire galaxy. The first speaker was Commander Tixarak from the Klaxi Collective. The insectoid being clicked and buzzed as he spoke about human military activities near Klaxi mining operations. His translation device converted the sounds into galactic standard language, but the tone was clearly hostile. Human vessels patrol regions far beyond their assigned territories. They claim to be conducting scientific research, but our intelligence reports suggest otherwise. These patrols appear designed to intimidate other species and assert dominance over strategic resources. Taiho knew the accusations were false. Human science ships did travel widely, but always with proper permits and always in cooperation with local authorities. The Klaxi were upset because human geological surveys had found better mineral deposits than their own teams had located. The next speaker was even worse. Ambassador Krexthaler from the Vorthak Crystal Matrix stood and began listing complaints about human cultural exports. His crystalline body reflected the chamber lights as he gestured with sharp, angular movements. Human entertainment corrupts the youth of civilized species. Their music promotes emotional instability, and their art encourages individual expression over collective harmony. Several worlds have reported social disruption after exposure to human cultural products. Taiho almost laughed at the absurdity of the complaint. Human music and art were popular because they offered something different from the rigid formal culture preferred by species like the Vorthak. Young beings across the galaxy enjoyed human creativity precisely because it was more free and expressive than their own traditions, but the real insults came when Vexthalan took the podium again. The council speaker looked directly at Taiho as he began to speak, and his words were clearly intended to humiliate humanity in front of the assembled representatives. The species known as humanity displays all the characteristics we have come to expect from primitive upstart races. They expand aggressively without consulting their betters. They ignore established protocols in favor of crude direct action. They seem incapable of understanding that their youth and inexperience require them to learn proper behavior from older, wiser civilizations. The chamber filled with clicking sounds and low harmonics as various species expressed agreement with the speaker's words. Taiho felt his anger growing but forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper would only prove their point about human primitive behavior. An elderly Rokari delegate named Sashitara raised one of her 4 arms to request speaking time. When recognized by the speaker, she stood and added her own criticism of humanity. Perhaps these mammals need stronger guidance than we originally believed. Their short lifespans may prevent them from developing proper long-term thinking. They act with the impulsiveness of children rather than the wisdom of mature beings. More sounds of agreement echoed through the chamber. Taiho looked around at faces and forms from dozens of different worlds and saw very little sympathy. Some representatives looked uncomfortable with the harsh language, but none spoke up to defend humanity. The worst insult came from Zelgaron, the military advisor from the Drakmori Empire. The reptilian being was known for his aggressive stance on galactic security issues, and his words were designed to be as cutting as possible. These humans remind me of many primitive species we have encountered over the centuries. They have just enough intelligence to be dangerous, but not enough wisdom to be useful. Perhaps they would serve the galaxy better as manual laborers under proper supervision, rather than as independent colonists spreading their crude culture to civilized worlds. Chamber erupted in what Taiho recognized as alien laughter. Different species expressed amusement in different ways, but the meaning was clear. The most powerful beings in the galaxy found the idea of reducing humanity to slave labor to be funny. Park Minji was watching from the observation deck above the main floor, and Taiho could see her hands clenched into fists. She was recording everything for transmission back to Earth, but he knew the humiliation was hard for her to witness. No human had ever been subjected to this kind of public mockery in the council. Chamber Zelgaron was not finished with his insults. He gestured toward Taiho with a clawed hand and continued his attack on humanity. Look at their representative. He stands there in his primitive clothing trying to appear dignified. But we all know the truth about his species. They have contributed nothing of value to galactic civilization except examples of how not to behave. Their wars, their pollution, their inability to control their own population growth. These are the hallmarks of a failed species that needs constant supervision. More alien laughter filled the chamber. Taiho noticed that not all species were participating in the mockery, but those who remained silent were clearly outnumbered by those who supported the attacks on humanity. The Numeri delegate spoke next, floating inside his environmental suit like a cloud of colored gas. His translated voice had an ethereal quality that made his words seem even more cutting. We have observed human behavior for several of their years now, and we see no sign of maturation or wisdom. They react emotionally to every situation rather than thinking through consequences. Their diplomatic methods are crude, and their military tactics are based on brute force rather than intelligence. Taiho had heard enough lies for one day. Human diplomacy had solved more galactic problems in the past 5 years than any other species had managed. Human military forces had provided security for trade routes and protected vulnerable colonies from raiders, but the Council seemed determined to ignore all positive contributions and focus only on imagined problems. Bexthalen called for order as the chamber filled with discussion between representatives. When quiet returned, he looked directly at Taiho and delivered what was clearly meant to be the final humiliation. The Council recognizes that the human representative may wish to respond to these observations. However, given the primitive nature of human communication methods, we can allow only 5 minutes for any statement he might wish to make. 5 minutes was barely enough time to begin addressing the serious charges against humanity. The time limit was clearly designed to prevent any effective defense and to emphasize humanity's low status in the galactic community. Most species were given at least 30 minutes when addressing the Council on important matters. The alien media representatives in the gallery focused their recording devices on Taiho as he stood to respond to the insults. He knew that his words and his behavior would be transmitted to every civilized world in the galaxy. Billions of beings would watch to see how humanity responded to this unprecedented attack. As he walked toward the speaking platform, Taiho could hear whispered comments in dozens of alien languages. The universal translators picked up fragments of conversation, and he caught words like primitive and amusing and pathetic. The most powerful beings in the galaxy were treating humanity like an embarrassing joke, but Taiho had not survived 20 years of human military service and 10 years of interstellar diplomacy by backing down from fights. He had faced worse odds than this and found ways to win. The Council thought they were dealing with a primitive upstart who would crumble under pressure. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Taiho stood at the speaking platform and looked out at the sea of alien faces watching him with amusement and contempt. The 5-minute time limit was ticking away, but he was not ready to begin his defense. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone in the chamber. Honorable Council Speaker, I request a brief recess to consult with Earth authorities before presenting humanity's response to these charges. The request was unusual, but not without precedent. Bexthalen looked annoyed at the delay but could not refuse without appearing unfair. He granted a 30-minute recess, and Taiho walked quickly from the chamber, followed by Park Minji. They found a secure communication booth in the diplomatic section of the station, and Taiho immediately opened priority channels to Earth. The first person he contacted was Dr. Cho Hyerim, the chief xenoarchaeologist at the Galactic Studies Institute in Seoul. Doctor, I need everything we have on human contributions to galactic civilization. Medical advances, technological breakthroughs, cultural exchanges, anything that proves our value to the galactic community. Dr. Cho understood the urgency immediately and began pulling files from classified databases. Her voice crackled through the Quantum communication link, as she read from her screen's ambassador. We have extensive records, but most of our contributions have been kept secret at the request of the species we helped. The Andromedan plague that killed millions across 12 different worlds was stopped by human medical researchers, led by Dr. Park Jin-woo. We developed the cure in 8 months, but agreed to let the Galactic Health Council take credit to avoid making other species look incompetent. That was exactly the kind of information Taiho needed. He opened another channel to Professor Nam Ji-sung, who headed the Technological Development Division. Professor, I need documentation of human engineering. Contributions, especially anything related to faster-than-light travel. Nam's response came quickly. The quantum tunneling drive that most council species use for interstellar travel was developed by human physicist Dr. Kwon Min-ha, working with a team at New Busan Technical Institute. The original Zentarian design was inefficient and dangerous. Our modifications increased speed by 300% and reduced energy consumption by half. Taiho felt his confidence growing as more information flowed in. Humanity had made major contributions to galactic civilization, but had kept quiet about most of them, to avoid making older species feel threatened or embarrassed. Park Minji was monitoring other communication channels and reported more useful intelligence. Captain Lee Hyunwoo at Military Intelligence confirms that human forces have been involved in 17 classified operations to protect alien colonies from raiders and hostile forces. None of the affected species requested that these operations be made public. The picture was becoming clearer. Humanity had spent years helping other species while allowing them to take credit for the results. The policy was designed to build goodwill and avoid the kind of resentment that came from making older civilizations look backward or incompetent. Dr. Cho sent over medical files showing human contributions to alien health and safety. When the Klaxi suffered an outbreak of crystalline rot disease that threatened to destroy their entire civilization, human biochemists developed an antifungal treatment in 6 weeks. The Klaxi government requested that human involvement be kept secret to avoid political problems at home. Professor Nam provided technological data that was even more impressive. The universal translator system used throughout the galaxy was based on human linguistic analysis. Before our involvement, different species could barely communicate with each other. We created the mathematical framework that makes real-time translation possible between completely different forms of language. The most shocking revelation came from Earth's intelligence services. Agent Jang Sora reported from the monitoring station that human deep space sensors had detected 3 separate invasion fleets from outside the galaxy. Over the past decade, human military forces had intercepted and destroyed all 3 fleets without any alien species. Even knowing the threats existed, Taiho realized that humanity had been protecting the entire galactic community while being treated as junior partners, who needed constant supervision. The irony was almost too much to believe. More information kept flowing in. The agricultural techniques that ended famines on 47 worlds were developed by human scientists. The new mining methods that made rare mineral extraction profitable were invented by human engineers. The disaster relief protocols that saved millions of lives during natural catastrophes were created by human emergency response teams. Professor Nam sent over cultural data that was equally impressive. Human music had become popular across the galaxy not because it was primitive, but because it expressed emotions that other species had forgotten how to feel. Human art was spreading because it offered perspectives that challenged rigid traditional thinking. The most important revelation came from Dr. Yang Sun-hee, who directed the Deep Space Monitoring Array on the edge of human territory. Her sensors had detected massive energy signatures from dark space beyond the galactic rim. Something was coming toward their region of space, and it was bigger than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ambassador, we estimate 18 months before first contact. With whatever is approaching from outside the galaxy, our analysis suggests a hostile force with technology beyond anything currently known. Humanity has been quietly preparing defensive measures, but we cannot handle this threat alone. Taiho looked at Park Minji and saw his own thoughts reflected in her expression. The council was busy insulting humanity while completely unaware that a massive threat was approaching their entire civilization. Human forces were the only ones even monitoring for such dangers. The final piece of intelligence came from Commander Choi Ji-won, who ran cultural exchange programs between Earth and alien worlds. Her report showed that human peacekeeping efforts had prevented dozens of potential conflicts between different species. Human diplomats worked behind the scenes to resolve trade disputes, territorial disagreements, and cultural misunderstandings. By the time the 30-minute recess ended, Taiho had enough information to completely change the tone of the debate. Humanity was not the primitive upstart species the Council believed them to be. They were the secret guardians of galactic civilization. Park Minji gathered all the data files and prepared to transmit supporting evidence to the main chamber's display systems. She looked nervous but determined as she organized the massive amount of information they had collected. "Sir, you have enough material here to talk for hours, but you still only have 5 minutes when we return to the chamber." Taiho smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. 5 minutes would be more than enough time to deliver the message he had in mind. He was no longer planning to defend humanity against the Council's charges. He was planning to put the Council itself on trial. The walk back to the chamber felt different than the walk out. Taiho moved with confidence and purpose while alien representatives watched him with curious expressions. Word had spread that the human diplomat had spent the recess in intense communication with Earth. When they entered the chamber, Taiho noticed that several new faces had appeared in the gallery. Representatives who had not bothered to attend the original session were now present to see how humanity would respond to the unprecedented public humiliation. Vexthalan called the session back to order and gestured for Taiho to return to the speaking platform. The Zentorian's expression suggested he expected to hear either a weak apology or an angry outburst that would prove human primitive nature. Instead, Taiho walked calmly to the platform and stood quietly for several seconds, looking out at the assembled representatives. His silence stretched long enough to make some of them uncomfortable, and the chamber grew completely quiet. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady and clear without any trace of anger or defensiveness. "Honored representatives, you have spent considerable time today discussing humanity's alleged failures and shortcomings. Before I address those charges, I would like to remind you of a few facts that seem to have been forgotten in your enthusiasm to judge my species. The universal translators that allow us to communicate were perfected by human linguists. The quantum drives that brought many of you here today were designed by human engineers. The medical protocols that have saved millions of alien lives were developed by human doctors. The agricultural methods feeding 47 worlds were created by human farmers." The chamber began to stir as representatives realized that Taiho was not planning to apologize or beg for mercy. His tone was calm and factual, but the implications of his words were becoming clear. Park Minji activated the data transmission systems and began feeding supporting documentation to the chamber's display screens. Proof of human contributions to galactic civilization filled the air above the assembled representatives. Taiho was just getting started. The holographic displays above the chamber floor showed detailed records of human achievements that most council members had never seen before. Medical files showed human doctors working to save alien lives during plague outbreaks. Engineering blueprints revealed human designs at the heart of galactic infrastructure. Cultural exchange records documented human peacekeeping efforts across dozens of worlds. Taiho let the evidence speak for itself while the chamber filled with murmurs of surprise and confusion. Many representatives were seeing proof of human contributions. For the first time in their earlier confidence was beginning to waver. "You speak of human aggression as though it were a character flaw that threatens galactic peace. Allow me to show you what human aggression really looks like when properly applied." The displays shifted to show classified military records that had never been shared with the Council before. Images of human ships intercepting raider fleets before they could attack vulnerable colonies. Battle reports from conflicts where human forces had protected alien trade routes. Intelligence files documenting 3 separate invasion attempts from outside the galaxy that human deep space sensors had detected, and human military units had stopped when the Void Hunters from the Magellanic Clouds sent scout fleets to probe our galactic defenses. It was human vessels that engaged them at the edge of explored space. While your civilized species debated whether these reports were credible, human pilots were dying to keep the threat from reaching populated worlds. Commander Tixerak shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the displays showed Klaxi colonies that had been saved by human intervention. The insectoid officer had spent the morning complaining about human military patrols, but the evidence showed those same patrols protecting his people from dangers they had never even detected. The agricultural complaints were equally absurd when compared to the facts. Taiho gestured toward the displays as they showed crop yield data from worlds across the galaxy. You criticize our expansion methods but fail to mention that every human colony has improved conditions for neighboring species. When we settled New Busan, the local Fenari were struggling with soil depletion that threatened mass starvation. Human agricultural specialists introduced crop rotation techniques and nitrogen-fixing plants that doubled their harvest yields within 2 growing seasons. Similar stories played out across dozens of worlds. Human settlements had brought advanced farming methods to struggling colonies and shared their knowledge freely with local populations. The complaints about rapid expansion ignored the fact that human colonies consistently helped, rather than harmed their alien neighbors. The displays shifted again to show technological innovations that had revolutionized galactic civilization. Taiho pointed to quantum drive specifications that bore human signatures. The faster-than-light travel system used by most species represented here today was invented by Dr. Quan Minha at the New Busan Technical Institute. The original Zentorian design was inefficient and suffered regular containment failures that killed thousands of travelers each year. Human modifications eliminated the safety problems and increased travel speeds by 300%. Vexthalen's blue-gray skin darkened with embarrassment as the evidence showed his own species benefiting from human innovations while publicly criticizing human contributions. The speaker had spent years taking credit for transportation improvements that were actually human achievements, but the most damning evidence was yet to come. Dr. Yang Sunhee's deep space monitoring data filled the displays with energy signatures and trajectory calculations that painted a terrifying picture. While you debate whether humanity deserves a place at this table, our sensor arrays have detected massive energy signatures approaching from dark space beyond the galactic rim. Analysis indicates a hostile force with technology superior to anything currently known. Current projections show first contact in approximately 18 months. Chamber fell silent as representatives absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. An unknown threat was approaching their entire civilization, while they wasted time insulting the species that had discovered the danger. Human deep space monitoring stations are the only sensor networks with sufficient range and sensitivity to detect threats from intergalactic distances. For the past 5 years, we have been tracking various anomalies and preparing defensive countermeasures. We have shared none of this information with the Council because, frankly, we were not sure you would believe us or act appropriately on the intelligence. Taiho's words carried a sting that was impossible to ignore. Humanity had been protecting galactic civilization while the Council treated them as primitive upstarts who needed constant supervision. The cultural complaints were perhaps the most ironic of all. The displays now showed artistic and musical works that had spread across the galaxy, despite official disapproval from conservative governments. Human music and art are popular throughout the galaxy, not because they corrupt alien youth, but because they offer something your rigid traditional cultures have forgotten how to provide: individual expression, emotional honesty, creative freedom. Young beings from dozens of species embrace human culture because it gives them permission to think and feel as individuals rather than as components in collective systems. Several younger representatives in the chamber looked uncomfortable as Taiho exposed the generational tensions that human culture had brought to light. Older species leaders preferred conformity and tradition, while their youth increasingly embraced human ideas about personal freedom and creative expression. The medical evidence was overwhelming. Display screens showed human doctors and researchers working to solve health problems that affected only alien physiology. Diseases that human could never catch had been cured by human scientists who studied alien biochemistry out of pure desire to help. When crystalline rot disease threatened to destroy the entire Klaxi civilization, our biochemists worked around the clock to develop an antifungal treatment. We created a cure in 6 weeks for a disease that had puzzled Klaxi scientists for generations. Your government requested that our involvement be kept secret to avoid political embarrassment, Commander. Tixerac's carapace shifted colors in what Taiho recognized as a sign of extreme discomfort. The Klaxi officer could hardly continue criticizing humanity after being reminded that his entire species existed only because human scientists had saved them from extinction. The diplomatic record was equally impressive. Choi Ji-won's cultural exchange files showed human mediators resolving conflicts between species that had been feuding for centuries. Trade disputes that had threatened to become shooting wars were settled through human intervention. The Drakmori-Namari border conflict that nearly triggered a galactic war was resolved by human diplomat Kim Soo-young working behind the scenes for 8 months. Neither government wanted to admit that primitive humans had succeeded where their own negotiators had failed, so they agreed to keep our involvement classified. More uncomfortable, shifting rippled through the chamber as representatives realized how much they owed to the species they had been insulting. Human diplomats had been quietly preventing conflicts and solving problems, while allowing other species to take credit for the results. But the final revelation was the most shocking of all. Intelligence files showed the true extent of human military operations throughout the galaxy. Not conquest or intimidation, but protection and peacekeeping on a scale that dwarfed official galactic security forces. Human military units have been involved in over 200 classified operations to protect alien colonies from raiders, pirates, and hostile forces. We have intercepted 17 separate invasion fleets before they could reach populated systems. We have provided disaster relief to 43 worlds during natural catastrophes. All of this was done quietly, without fanfare, and without seeking recognition or reward. Admiral Han Sung-min's fleet positions appeared on the tactical displays, showing human ships scattered throughout galactic space, not positioned for conquest, but strategically placed to respond to threats and emergencies. The ships you see marked on these displays represent the largest peacekeeping force in the galaxy. Human vessels patrol trade routes, provide emergency medical assistance, and stand ready to defend any world that calls for help. We do not ask permission, because when lives are at stake, there is no time for committee meetings and formal debates. The chamber was completely silent now as the full scope of human contributions became clear. Every major improvement in galactic civilization over the past decade had involved human innovation, human sacrifice, or human protection. The primitive upstart species had been secretly holding their entire civilization together. Taiho looked directly at each council member as he delivered his final challenge to their assumptions about humanity. You want to know what humans contribute to galactic civilization? We contribute the radical idea that intelligence and dignity are not determined by age of civilization or technological superiority. We contribute the belief that species should be judged by their actions rather than their origins. We contribute something you have apparently forgotten in your comfortable positions of authority. He paused and let his words sink in before delivering the conclusion that would change everything. Most importantly, we contribute the backbone to stand up when we see injustice, regardless of the personal cost. Because the silence in the council chamber stretched on as representatives struggled to process what they had just learned. Everything they thought they knew about humanity had been turned upside down in the space of minutes. The primitive upstart species they had been mocking was revealed as the secret guardian of galactic civilization. Taiho was not finished. His voice grew stronger as he prepared to deliver the revelation that would shake the very foundations of galactic politics. But there is something else you need to understand about humanity. Something that will determine whether any of us survive what is coming from dark space. The tactical displays shifted to show real-time positions of human vessels throughout the galaxy. Not the few ships the Council knew about, but hundreds of vessels positioned at strategic points across known space. Medical frigates stationed near populated worlds. Deep space monitoring stations watching the galactic rim. Defense platforms guarding critical trade routes. Admiral Han Sung-min received my signal 30 minutes ago and ordered all human vessels to reveal their true positions. What you see now is not an invasion fleet or a show of force. It is the largest humanitarian and defense network ever created. The scale of human operations was staggering. Council members stared at the displays showing ships they had never detected, performing missions they had never imagined. The species they had dismissed as primitive had been running a secret protection network that spanned the entire galaxy. Every ship marked on these displays represents humans who chose to help rather Then conquer, to heal rather than harm, to protect rather than exploit. We do not ask for recognition or reward because we understand something that apparently escaped your notice during your long years of civilization. Tejo gestured toward the assembled representatives with barely controlled emotion in his voice. We understand that when intelligent beings are in danger, you help them. Not because they asked politely, not because they followed proper diplomatic protocols, not because they have something to offer in return. You help them because it is the right thing to do. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. These were not the words of a primitive species begging for acceptance. This was the voice of moral authority speaking to those who had forgotten what civilization truly meant. Commander Tixerak rose from his seat, and his translation device carried a tone of shame and regret that was unmistakable. Ambassador Tejo, the Klaxi Collective owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. Our criticism of your military patrols was born of ignorance and jealousy. We did not know that human ships were protecting our mining operations from raiders. Similar statements came from representatives throughout the chamber. Species after species stood to acknowledge debts to humanity that had been hidden for years. The Drakmori admitted that human mediation had prevented a war with the Nomari. The Fenari revealed that human agricultural aid had saved their entire civilization from starvation. But Vex Thalan remained standing at his podium looking stunned and uncertain. The Zentaurian speaker had built his political career on the principle that older species should guide younger ones. Now he faced evidence that the youngest species in the council had been protecting everyone else. The most shocking revelation was still to come. Park Minji activated the final set of classified files, and the displays filled with intelligence data about the approaching threat from dark space. Dr. Yang Sunhee's deep space arrays had detected more than just energy signatures. The approaching force consisted of thousands of vessels using technology that could manipulate space-time itself. Preliminary analysis suggested a hostile species with the power to destroy entire solar systems. While you spent this morning debating whether humanity deserves respect, our scientists and military planners were developing strategies to defend against an invasion force that could end galactic civilization. We have identified their likely approach routes and begun constructing defensive positions along the rim. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions as representatives realized the magnitude of the threat. Some species had no military forces capable of interstellar combat. Others possessed advanced weapons but lacked the strategic planning necessary to coordinate a galactic defense. Tejo raised his voice to cut through the chaos and deliver his final challenge to the council. So you can continue this charade of putting humanity in its proper place. You can impose your sanctions and restrictions and feel satisfied that you have taught the primitive humans a lesson. But when those ships arrive from dark space in 18 months, you will discover something important. The chamber fell silent again as every representative focused on his words. You will discover that humanity does not need your permission to defend this galaxy. We will stand guard on the rim and fight that invasion fleet whether you support us or condemn us. Because that is who we are. That is what we contribute to civilization. Park Minji transmitted the final piece of evidence, and the displays showed construction projects throughout human space. Massive defense platforms were being built at jump points along the galactic rim. New classes of warships designed specifically for deep space combat were rolling out of human shipyards. Strategic material reserves were being stockpiled at forward bases. We have spent 5 years preparing for this threat while keeping our activities secret to avoid causing panic. Human engineers have developed new weapon systems and defensive technologies. Human strategists have planned battle formations and evacuation procedures. Human soldiers have trained for combat against enemies we have never encountered. The scope of human preparation was beyond anything the Council had imagined. While they debated trade agreements and cultural policies, humanity had been quietly building the largest military force in galactic history for the sole purpose of protecting everyone else. But the most powerful revelation came when Admiral Han Seungmin's recorded message played through the chamber's communication systems. The Admiral's weathered face appeared on the displays as he spoke directly to the assembled representatives. Honorable Council members, you have questioned humanity's place in galactic civilization. Let me make our position clear. Earth and her colonies will defend this galaxy against any threat, regardless of how we are treated by those we protect. This is not a negotiating position or a political statement. It is a promise. The recording showed human fleets moving into position along the galactic rim, massive ships built for war but dedicated to peace, weapons designed to destroy but committed to protection. You may continue to view us as primitive upstarts who need guidance from their betters. That is your choice, and you're right. But know this: when that invasion fleet arrives, humanity will be standing between them and every inhabited world in the galaxy. We will hold the line because someone has to, and apparently no one else is prepared to do so. The message ended, and the chamber remained silent for long moments. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat stunned by the realization that their entire civilization depended on the species they had been insulting. Taiho walked slowly back to the center of the speaking platform and looked out at faces that no longer showed amusement or contempt. Now he saw respect and, in some cases, shame and gratitude. I will leave you with one final thought. Humanity has never asked to be treated as your equals. We have never demanded recognition for our contributions to galactic civilization. We have never sought reward for the lives we have saved or the threats we have stopped. He paused and let his words carry to every corner of the vast chamber. All we have ever asked is the chance to stand among the stars as free beings, making our own choices and following our own path. Today you have the opportunity to grant that simple request, or to continue treating us as children who need constant supervision. The choice is yours. But understand that humanity's commitment to protecting this galaxy does not depend on your decision. We will continue to stand guard whether you welcome us as partners or tolerate us as a necessary evil. With those words, Taiho turned and walked toward the chamber exit. Park Minji followed him, carrying the data files that had changed everything. Behind them, the council sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend how completely their assumptions about humanity had been shattered. As they reached the doors, Taiho heard Vex Thalan call for an immediate recess to allow representatives to consult with their home governments. The speaker's voice carried none of its earlier authority and confidence. The corridor outside the chamber filled with alien representatives trying to speak with Taiho about humanity's revelations. Species that had supported the charges now wanted to discuss mutual defense agreements. Others offered apologies for their earlier words, but Taiho walked past them all without stopping. He had said everything that needed to be said. Now it was time to return to the real work of preparing for the storm that was coming from Dark Space Park. Minji caught up with him as they reached the diplomatic quarters, and her expression was one of amazement mixed with pride. Sir, that was the most incredible diplomatic presentation I have ever witnessed. You completely changed the political landscape of the galaxy in less than an hour. Taiho looked out the window at the stars beyond the station and thought about the threat approaching from the darkness between galaxies. In